most demand action. Mr. Spencer will start with a 15 to 20-minute presentation. Then Mr. Hester will follow that with his own presentation. Mr. Spencer will have a chance to respond, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So please also make sure you write down questions you want to ask of the speakers, because I hope that we will have a robust discussion. Civil discourse and democracy involves listening, analyzing, and discussing, and so we are really lucky to have a chance, an opportunity to model that today with our guest speakers on a really important issue facing our society. All right, thank you. With that, I will turn it over.
No problem. Good morning. My name is Don Spencer again. I'm the president of Oklahoma Second Amendment Association. I'm a licensed armed security officer, and I'm let's say, very involved in policy with legislation at the state capitol. But there's going to be questions and answers, but I have a question for you right now, and I would like to see a show of hands. Are the police legally obligated to protect you, the individual? Yes or no? We pay taxes and stuff. Yes or no? Are the police legally obligated to protect you, the individual? Never thought about it? Who has never even thought about it? Yeah, that's why we're here, aren't we? Okay. Well, let me point out one case real quick. In 1980, there were 3 women in a townhouse apartment. 2 of them were upstairs, and they heard their third roommate downstairs being attacked. So they called 911, which is pretty much what I'm going to do too. Call 911. They were assured that the law enforcement were on their way, and for the next 14 hours, these women were held captive. They were raped, they were robbed, they were beaten, and made to submit to their attackers. Well, once the police had finally showed up after they'd left, they sued the city of Washington, D.C. because no one ever gets sued there, right? Okay, this is yes, this is no, yeah, okay. No one ever gets sued there, and it goes to the Criminal Court of Appeals in the city, and actually the law finally ruled down that the police are under no individual, or they're under no obligation to protect any individual citizen. Did you know that? So the law enforcement, and again, even in the shooting that took place in Florida, we just saw the ruling a couple of weeks ago at the Florida school. It was ruled again, there was going to sue the law enforcement, and the judge threw it out because you cannot sue law enforcement because they did not uphold and do their due diligence of protection. So, and that's an excellent example of how government failed students because there's so many mistakes that took place on that day alone. But let me get back to the obligation. So if the police are not legally obligated to protect you, who does that leave that protection up to? Yourself. That's it. You're responsible for your own self-defense is exactly right. Now, I don't want this to sound like you don't call the police because they're not going to do anything. I know a lot of police officers and they're going to do their best to do everything they can, but there's that stopgap time between a violent act can take place, and they're often called the first responders when police and law enforcement are not the first responders, they're the professional responder. You're the first responder. And so that's why it's very important to be able to defend yourself. If you ever thought about, if you ever think about for a moment that what is it in you that drives you that I don't want to be harmed or I have a fear. That is a natural right that comes to you and that is placed in you for your own self-protection. And so it's important to recognize that. And in fact, we're so fortunate that our founding fathers recognized that and shored that up in the Constitution. And also even President George Washington said, no man should ever scruple at his own defense, which would include women, of course. That's exactly what that goes to. So keep that in mind also. Now, what's really unfortunate when we hear of gun violence, it's only a small peripheral issue of what all is taking place overall because the media will go straight to guns. But you know what? A lot of people may not realize the people that were murdered last year with a rifle, even if it was an AR-15, there were more people died from opioid overdose. There were more people died from sexually transmitted diseases. There were more people died from using of hammers or any kind of other object. But that's the way the media sensationalized. Yes, if there's 50 people that are killed at one time, there is a problem there. But my point is it's not just gun violence, it's violence as a whole. And how did we get to this point to violence as a whole would just seem to be so catastrophically get out of control? Well, I'm going to tell you real quick, and it might surprise you. you can get very close to pinpointing the issue on the lack of respect for marriage. Because of the lack of respect for marriage, it permeates all through society, because quite simply, if two people cohabitate and go to the actions of creating a child, the woman in that issue is 4 times more likely to be in a violent event. The child is 7 times more likely to be raised in a home of poverty. So when a home is broken down, the rest breaks down on through society as a whole. And we see that. So again, so now if the child is fortunate enough to be born, we just saw this week in New York State was bragging and thrilled to death because now they have the opportunity to be able to kill a baby just moments before it's born, because it's been so devalued. Human life has been so devalued. And so why wouldn't you think that, and also when you go through movies and TVs and stuff, that human life is continued to be devalued? I mean, I hate to say the actual word, but when women refer to women as a bitch and other words that are just completely inappropriate and this is basically a common term of endearment, again, we see life and be devalued as it goes on through and permeates through society as a whole. So these, if you get to the cause and the root cause of the issue, again, it's because of the devalue of life, and that it's not relevant. And my personal opinion, it is. I've been married for 35 years. I have 3 children, and we find this a very significant part of our life. And not everyone is able to grow up in that situation. I understand that. But again, marriage is the key center point to the problem of its lack of respect for that. Now, in gun cases and in gun violence, believe it or not, of the number of deaths, it does not even enter the top 10. It comes in at number 15, and like I previously stated, opioid overdose. You're more likely to die from a doctor giving you the wrong prescription than you are to die from gun violence. Now, like I say, I'm not trying to justify someone using gun violence, but that is also what we look at. And also what is not publicized, and I'm not a big fan of throwing some of these numbers out there, but the number of crimes that are thwarted because of a person is in legal, peaceful possession of a firearm is astronomical and way many-fold higher than those people that are killed with a gun. I personally, myself, not once but twice, have pulled a firearm and pointed it at a person for the act of self-defense, and thank God I didn't have to squeeze the trigger, because just pulling that weapon will change your life. It is an incredible experience that all of a sudden, and your heart just can go, and you can't even hear because your heart's beating so hard. And these things, but the presence of the firearm thwarted the crime. And that's what we do at the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association. Just 2 years ago, a lot of people didn't realize this. In the act of self-defense, if you actually pointed your weapon at a person that was coming to approach you, because Oklahoma laws have been so poor and court rulings have been so poor, that if you pulled a gun out and pointed it at a person and said, go away, and they're obviously threatening you, you could be charged with a felony. That seemed a bit crazy, but you had been justified in pulling the trigger. Because the way the courts were working at the time, they were saying, well, you know what? If you didn't squeeze the trigger, apparently you didn't need the gun. And that's just absolutely crazy. So 2 years ago at OK2A, one of the bills we worked in passed, in fact, maybe it was a year ago, was for the act of self-defense, so you could point a gun at a person, but you don't pull the trigger, that therefore it's not a crime. Because we had 2 people in our organization that had been charged with felony pointing on that. And again, this is I consider it a great deal, because the fact we don't want people shot. But the second part of this, there's people that won't get shot that probably need to, because they're going to go commit a crime on down the road. So there's two avenues to that. And like I say, the NRA uses a stat which I think is astronomical. I can't say that I agree with it, but they say there's over 2 million crimes thwarted every year by the peaceful citizen using a firearm. I know it exists because I've experienced it myself. And actually both times were reported to the police. So I don't know how they would keep a stat on that or not, because like I say, and of course you'll never hear about that in the media because it's just not sensationalized enough. And you're just not going to hear that there. let's see. Also, one of the biggest areas of a threat to violence, and especially gun violence, is the no-gun zone. And today we are setting in one. Now, we drove in on the campus today. I walked in here. This is a crowded room. If some crazy maniac were to come in here, where would you go? We're in a fishbowl here, folks. What would you do for self-defense right now? If you heard shots or something taking place down the hallway, what would you do? There's not a whole lot we can do right here out, and people would probably get hurt trampling each other if we're trying to get out of here. So my point being is we've got to eliminate no gun zones, and the university campuses, college campuses are one of those that need to take place. Virginia Tech University, there was a terrible experience, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, with more than 30 students murdered by a crazy, whacked out guy, no doubt about it. And let me take back one other point too before I forget. Louis Restaurant, everyone that just happened last May, right here in Oklahoma City. The shooter, the bad guy, and people worry about background checks. He was a licensed armed security officer. The crazy guy decides to go up there and start shooting. Now here's the other part of that. How was he stopped? Anybody remember? Just real quick. Yes, real quick. Yes, Brian Whittle. Thank you very much. Brian Whittle. Now, here's the other part. Brian Whittle did not have a license to carry his gun. But he stopped and thwarted that crime. We've also at OK2A, there were 4 of the victims of that event were at our OK2A meeting, and they got to meet Brian Whittle for the first time. One lady had been shot through the chest and through the ribs. One of the young girls shot through the arm, one shot in the back, and one the gun was pointed at and he missed. We provided them with a survivor award, and also, needless to say, that some of the things that they've gone through, it's going to just affect them for life. But how many more people would have been involved in that carnage? And since no one died except the shooter, the perpetrator, its media sensation dropped off very, very quickly and really didn't even go national. But had he been able to continue, then it would have gotten the attention. And again, that was because a prepared citizen had a firearm, and by the way, he was in legal possession of the firearm because he was a Navy, or he was a reserve officer, or I'm sorry, a reserve military, which we had, OK2A had passed a law the year before, those people could carry guns without permission from the government. And so that's one of the avenues, don't let me run too far here, that's one of the avenues that we work on very much with. Now, OK2A, you may not realize right now here, right today, you have the Stand Your Ground law. And what that does, that protects you, because if a perpetrator were to enter this room, you have the right to defend yourself because you're in a legal area and you're not doing anything illegal. It didn't matter if you picked up this, which she would probably appreciate, use this for a weapon and beat someone with it into submission so you could escape, that would be legal. That's a part of the Stand Your Ground law, but everyone decides to refer it back to a firearm. Well, a firearm can be used, but here it cannot be. It's the university decided, and they could allow people to carry, but they don't. But it's as if they would prefer you be beaten, shot, raped, robbed, as opposed to you being able to explain to the police officers how that perpetrator got a fatal bullet hole through his head. Now, I don't know about you, I don't see the need for a woman to be raped at all, period. And if she needs to defend herself from it, she should. And it should not be limited by government. It should be limited by her choice if she decides if she would want to carry that type of a weapon. And so I would encourage people. Also, we're accused of, well, we're wanting to get laws passed with people not having training. Absolutely, I want everyone to be trained. I'm a CLEAT certified firearm instructor, authorized by the state of Oklahoma. I deal with people, but folks, it doesn't take that much training. It doesn't take that terrible. We're not expecting you to be SWAT members. We're just expecting you to come up to the level that you're comfortable with dealing with, carrying a firearm, or using a firearm, or maybe even disarming a firearm in a situation. That's our point. So I want to keep that in mind too. And this year, Oklahoma Second Amendment Association like I said, we have a host of bills that are being introduced to continue to get the rights back that should have never been taken away. Oklahoma became a state in 1907, and its first law violated the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution that says you cannot carry a pistol, rifle, or shotgun on or about your person. And there was a man convicted for being in his own front yard on his own private property for carrying, because he had a Colt pistol in his pocket or in his belt, and he was peacefully there. He was arrested, he was convicted, he went to the State Criminal Court of Appeals, and it was upheld. So from 1907 to 2012, it was illegal for a person in Oklahoma peacefully to have a gun for self-defense on their own private property. Sounds pretty bad, huh? If you would like to be able to defend yourself. So OK2A has worked on many aspects to bring back so you don't have to think whether you have the right to self-defense. You just go into self-defense and go from there. So, and that's part. And this year we have, at the request of the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association, we have 37 bills to support your right to be able to defend yourself, and also for private property owner rights. We're very big on that because a firearm is a part of private property. And we've been also, since 2009, we've had more than 90 positive changes in state law to once again bring your rights back to where you can defend yourself and not have to think about it. You know, like I said, if someone were to attack in here and you were to pick a knife up, are you going to go to jail for using that knife? Well, I don't want you to have to even think about it. I want you to be a survivor and not be a victim. Survivors have the opportunity to possibly tell their story. Victims don't. Be a survivor, and part of that is taking your own self-defense upon yourself.
3 minutes, or wrap up.
Wrap up. Okay. The other thing too is I wanted to point out when you, as I mentioned earlier on, the police officer being the professional responder, and why we cannot completely depend upon the officer until they get there. Well, if someone were to drop of a heart attack, we're going to do CPR until the professionals get there. If a fire were to break out, like say in your home, I'm going to use my fire extinguisher and do what I can to remove my family out until the professionals get there. It's not any different with self-defense. It's up to you to maintain that self-defense. If you choose, or you can choose not to, and you'll have to live with the consequences thereof. But like I say, from our point of view, self-defense, it's a right, it's a God-given right, and that you should be able to exercise that right freely with limited hesitation to it. So again, I appreciate the time, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak this morning too. All right?
Thank you.
Sure.
I should
Did you throw your pen at me? Did you see that? Did you see that violence?
I know.
It's terrible.